This is a presentation of OneLogin training.
Welcome to Configuring the G Suite App Connector, Part 2. All right, so now we have our provisioning all configured. We know it works. Now we can go configure single sign-on. Configuring single sign-on for Google Workspace is really easy if you use Automatic Configuration tab. So you go to the SSO tab, and since again, we've already configured our API connections and we matched up our parameters and set up even our roles, so we know people are going to be assigned to the app. All we have to do at this point is toggle the Enable Automatic SAML configuration and accept the defaults. If you want to, you can use the Manual Configuration tab where you'll find a certificate and URLs for things like the SAML endpoint, and you can go directly into the Google Admin Console and do all of this manually. But why do that when you can just toggle that little Enable Automatic SAML configuration and it will do it all for you? So let's go do it. All right. We've reached the magic time where we're going to enable single sign-on. We're going to go to that Google Workspace app connector, and we're going to go to the SSO tab and enable automatic SAML configuration. Okay, I got it. That's what's going to happen. It's going to automatically, everything's going to be redirected. Sure. Ta-da! Make sure everybody has access. I already did that. I signed the role. My user is assigned to the role. We're good there. Sometimes this doesn't want to go away, so fine. I'm just going to click on away, and I'm going to refresh this page. And voila. I've enabled SAML configuration. Last step, make sure my users can go see this thing. So now my users should be able to single sign on into G Suite. Now we should be all ready to go. Just one last change we need to make before we're ready to cut over our users. Toggle the visible in portal toggle back to green so we can enable it. And all of our users should see the new G Suite app connector in their portal and be automatically able to log in to Google Workspace. And of course, let's go see this at work. All right, finally, got my provisioning all enabled, got single sign-on enabled. I got everybody assigned to this via a role. Now they should be able to log into it. And again, make sure that it's visible in the portal. Yep. I'm good to go. So let's go check it out for Mr. Blake Hat. So we're logged in as Mr. Blake Hat. We do not see the tile here on our Frequents tab yet because we haven't gone to it. So let's go over to Company tab. There we see G Suite. And bump, click. Watch URLs change. Sure, I'll accept this. It's the first time I'm logging in as him. And ta-da! We got in from OneLogin. Blake Hat can successfully do his job now. So we have both a G Suite app connector and a G Suite directory connector. And sometimes folks get a little confused. So before we finish off here, let's just describe some of the differences between them. So G Suite App Connector, which is the one that we've been looking at throughout this course, basically can push users into Google Workspace from OneLogin if provisioning is enabled. Of course, it also enables users to log into Google Workspace directly from OneLogin, that SSO part. The G Suite Directory Connector flows user information the other direction from Google Workspace to OneLogin. So it can be used to do like an initial user import from Google Workspace, say when you're initially setting up OneLogin, or it can be kept up and running so that users, if they're created over in Google Workspace, can automatically be replicated over to OneLogin. kind of like looking at Google Workspace as your source of truth for your users. So the performing an initial import piece is probably one of the primary uses for the G Suite directory connector. Once the directory connector is configured, you would simply import existing users from Google Workspace into OneLogin. And from there, of course, they could then be assigned to a role that could automatically assign them to Google Workspace. So they can utilize all their resources there and single sign-on from OneLogin. In this setup, you would, though, consider OneLogin to be your source of truth for user information going forward. So after you do that initial import, you would disable that G Suite directory connector, thus relying upon updates to go directly into OneLogin or new users to be created directly in OneLogin from that point forward. So the flow after you've done the initial import would look something like this. New user comes along, create the new user in OneLogin, and of course, assign them to a role that then assigns them to Google Workspace, and necessary, create an account for them in Google Workspace. So the Google directory, we no longer need to directly connect to using the directory connector. You could also look upon Google Workspace as your source of truth, as I mentioned. So that would entail basically same kind of setup. Set up the G Suite directory connector, import users from Google Workspace into OneLogin, and of course I still need an app connector for Google Workspace so my users can log into Google Workspace from OneLogin. Only difference here is I wouldn't enable provisioning. So all that stuff that we walked through at the beginning of the course where we enabled provisioning, don't do that part. Just go straight to enabling the SSO, which means you do still need to enable API access, but a lot less complicated, obviously, to set up. So if this is the flow that you choose, which sometimes people do, again, usually G Suite directory connector, only used for user import, initial setup steps, but if you do want to look upon G Suite as your source of truth, then the flow would look like I create a user over in Google Workspace, user gets replicated over to OneLogin, and again, I'd assign the user to G Suite app connector, but I'm only using the SSO functionality of the app connector, not the provisioning functionality. Last option is actually bidirectional. So basically users could be created or updated in Google Workspace, or they could be created and updated in OneLogin's directory. So you can set up the directory connector to Google Workspace, thus users created Google Workspace get created over in OneLogin, and you would have provisioning enabled on that G Suite app connector. So the user information can be pushed over from OneLogin into Google Workspace. So this one, obviously a little bit more complicated. Anytime you have more than one source of truth for a particular user account, kind of asking for maybe a little bit of complication here. So we don't really recommend this, though obviously it is possible. This concludes configuring the G Suite app connector.
This is a presentation of OneLogin Training.